The sound of the station's communication implant resonated sharply in Ambassador Tisha's ear, causing her heart to race with immediate urgency. Ambassador Tisha, we have a problem. The Zerlith cubs aren't eating. Commander Drake's voice crackled through the comm. They're surrounded by fresh meat, and they're starving themselves. We need you here. Tisha's scales flashed a deep crimson. She didn't waste a moment. How long has this been happening? 36 hours, Drake replied, his voice tinged with panic. We're running out of time. She had already sprinted down the station's wide corridors, her long limbs pushing her forward. The Zerlith cubs were lethal, capable of tracking and bringing down prey in minutes, their fangs sharp enough to sever steel. Yet, they weren't feeding. Tisha slid into the observation room, almost colliding with the transparent wall. Inside, the cubs' young Zerlith, still too small to hunt on their own, but larger than any grown. Humans sat in a perfect circle around piles of meat, organized into neat stacks. What in the stars? Tisha muttered. The cubs had arranged the meat into symmetrical shapes, circular piles with flattened tissue, smooth muscle sections, and layers of torn organ meat. The largest cub, already showing signs of dominance despite his youth, stood up from his pile and growled, the translator rendering his growl as a word unfamiliar to Tisha. Home, Drake's voice interrupted her thoughts. They've been repeating that word for hours. Home. We've tried sending in xenobiologists, but they're too aggressive. Tisha's mind raced. Zerlith were solitary creatures by nature, built for stealth and speed, known for being highly territorial, but without any form of intellectual socialization beyond simple hunting techniques. Are they defending food? She asked, her voice sharp. They've never shown any form of territorial behavior like this before, Drake responded. It's as if they're constructing something. Tisha narrowed her eyes. She pulled up the station's database and analyzed the footage. The video showed a scene from yesterday. A young human maintenance worker named Lara sat at a table in the station's cafeteria. She had a small pet bird perched on her shoulder. As Lara prepared a sandwich, the cubs observed from a distance, their heads locked on her every movement. Focus on their eyes, Tisha said, her voice steady. They're staring at her hands, at what she's doing with her food. The cubs had stopped moving when Lara stacked ingredients, lettuce, cheese, slices of meat, layering them carefully. She pressed down the sandwich and took a bite, and the cubs' eyes followed every motion, their focus unwavering. Curious, Tisha murmured. Drake pulled up additional footage. As Lara left the cafeteria, one of the cubs, the largest one, stood up. He moved to the meat pile, carefully selecting specific cuts, strips of muscle, shreds of tissue, flat slabs of meat. He's mimicking her, Tisha whispered. The cub began arranging the pieces of meat into layers. The others joined him, each building their own pile, each following a similar sequence. This isn't possible, Tisha said, staring in disbelief. They can't be copying her. They don't have the capacity. Drake's voice wavered as he added, the cubs aren't aggressive anymore. They're constructing, just as the situation seemed beyond comprehension, Doctor. Pethar, the galaxy's leading expert in predator psychology, stormed into the room. His 6 arms swayed with urgency as he approached the barrier, his tendrils vibrating with confusion. This doesn't make sense, he said, his voice thick with frustration. Zerlith cubs are hardwired to hunt and kill. They don't have the mental capacity to form concepts like this. This is a mistake. Tisha flicked her tail in irritation. Mistake or not, it's happening. Look at them. Dr. Pethar leaned closer to the transparent wall, his multi-eyed gaze focused on the cub's movements. If they're imitating a human's actions, what were they copying? Tisha hesitated. A sandwich. Lara made a sandwich in front of them. The cubs had now moved to the center of their piles, rearranging them with care. Tisha's eyes narrowed as she realized the cubs weren't just mimicking Lara's sandwich. They were creating something. But what? What are they doing with these piles? She asked, almost to herself. Are they thinking of it as something more? Dr. Pethar's skin rippled with a sudden revelation. They're not eating because they're trying to create what they saw, a sandwich. But they're not using bread, they're using meat. It's a concept they don't fully understand, but they're attempting to replicate it in their own way. Taisha motioned to Drake, who was already typing into his console. We need Lara. Get her here. Now. Lara arrived a few minutes later, looking puzzled at the scene. She walked toward the cubs, who had now finished their constructions, all staring intently at her. They've been watching me, Lara said, holding up a sandwich she'd prepared earlier. Maybe. They want to try making their own? Taisha stood frozen. Can you teach them? Lara shrugged, looking at the cubs with a mix of amusement and awe. I don't know. I can try. Lara sat down in front of the cubs, placing her sandwich on the floor and beginning to break it down. Okay, guys, she said, her voice soft. This is how you make a sandwich. First, you need a base. Let's try to build a proper one. The cubs watched intently as Lara demonstrated with small pieces of meat. She showed them how to layer the ingredients, and to her shock, the cubs started mimicking her actions. They reached for pieces of meat, cautiously, but methodically, arranging them in neat layers, just like Lara had. They're learning, Taisha said, her voice full of disbelief. These cubs, these apex predators are learning from a human, Drake's communicator beeped. The Zelkath High Council is arriving in 15 minutes. We need answers, and fast. Taisha turned to Lara. Do you think you can teach them more? Lara smiled at the cubs, who now appeared content, their hunger finally being sated by the makeshift sandwiches they'd created. Yeah, I think they're ready to learn more. As the door opened to reveal the Zelkath High Council, Taisha turned to face them, knowing that the future of their species and perhaps the entire galaxy could change with one simple act of teaching. The High Council stood in stunned silence as they watched the cubs interact with Lara. They're learning, Zulvera, the High Matriarch of the Zelkath, said softly. How is this possible? We've been observing them in isolation for centuries, Taisha explained. But when they interacted with a human, they began to learn. They began to evolve. Lara looked at the cubs, now eagerly reaching for more ingredients to build their creations. She laughed softly. I guess I'm a teacher now. Zulvera's claws retracted as she pondered the future. Perhaps this is just the beginning, a new chapter for our species.